She had been planning this for 18 months. And when the certified mail landed, 3 siblings who hadn't answered a single phone call suddenly had a lot to say. But here's the part that will stay with you: what my mother wrote at the end, sealed inside that envelope, is something I'll never forget. And neither will you. My name is Myra Thornton. And I was the only one of 4 children who signed the check to bury my mother. The woman behind the desk at Gentry & Sons Funeral Home had a clipboard and a patient smile. I wrote the check for $8,200. My hand was steady. My phone was not ringing, which was the same thing it had been doing for 3 days. Not ringing. I had called Garrett twice, Denise 3 times, Keith 4. Garrett asked about insurance. Denise said she'd try to make it. Keith let it go to voicemail, and the voicemail was full, which told me everything about how he handled obligations. My mother, Lorraine Thornton, 67 years old, retired nurse, had died on a Tuesday morning in Shelbyville, Tennessee. I was the only one of her 4 children sitting in that funeral home signing checks. The woman asked if the family would be splitting the cost. I said, "It's just me." She didn't look surprised. People in Shelbyville knew my family. They knew who showed up and who didn't. I capped my pen, slid the check across the desk, and thought, they will regret this. Not because I would make them. Because my mother already had. 14 months before that check, Mama sat on her back porch in a metal rocker that squeaked every 4 seconds. She had a nasal cannula looped over her ears and an oxygen concentrator humming beside her like a loyal dog. COPD, for years of it by then. Her lungs were operating at 31% capacity. Stairs were a negotiation. Laughing too hard was a risk. I drove 12 minutes from my apartment every single evening after closing the books at the accounting firm where I'd worked since I was 24. Tuesdays were pot roast. Thursdays were chicken and rice from the place on Madison. She never asked me to come. I just came. One Thursday in January, she was quieter than usual. She watched me unpack the styrofoam containers and said, "I need to talk to Harold about the will." Harold Fun. Family lawyer. Office above the hardware store on the square. She called him the next morning. I drove her to his office the following Tuesday. She went in alone. I sat in the hallway and read a magazine about bass fishing. 40 minutes later, she tucked a manila envelope into her purse and said, "Let's get lunch." We went to the diner on Canton Street. She ordered a patty melt and didn't mention the will again for 13 months. That was my mother. She made her decisions like sutures, precise, final, and meant to hold. Now let me tell you about my siblings. Because you need to understand exactly who these people are before you hear what happens next. Garrett is the oldest. 38. Lives in Atlanta. During the 14 months of Mama's decline, he visited once. Once. He came for Thanksgiving, stayed 2 nights, spent most of it on his phone. When Mama's oxygen bill hit $340 and Medicare wouldn't cover the portable unit, I called Garrett. He said things were tight. I paid the bill. When Mama needed someone to drive her to the pulmonologist in Murfreesboro, I called Garrett. He said he'd try to come down. He didn't. I drove her. When she fell getting out of the bathtub and I found her sitting on the tile floor at 11 p.m. holding her wrist, I texted Garrett. He responded with a thumbs up emoji. A thumbs up. For a woman who had driven him to baseball practice 5 days a week for 6 years. Who had co-signed his first apartment lease. Who had lent him $4,000 for his truck and never asked for it back. He sent a thumbs up. I saved that text. I saved all of them. I didn't know yet why that mattered, but my mother had taught me something about receipts. Denise is the middle daughter. 36. Sells real estate in Dallas, posts about it constantly. Open houses, new listings, motivational quotes over photos of empty kitchens. In the 14 months before Mama died, Mama called Denise 17 times. Denise picked up twice. I know because Mama kept a small notebook by the phone. An old habit from nursing, charting everything. 17 calls, 2 answers. The first time, Denise talked for 11 minutes and said she was thinking about visiting in the summer. She didn't visit. The second time, she said she'd definitely come for Christmas. She didn't come for Christmas. She sent a fruit basket. It arrived 3 days late. Mama put the fruit on the counter and didn't eat any of it. I found it 2 weeks later, brown and soft, and threw it away. That fruit basket told me everything about Denise's version of love, expensive enough to feel generous, impersonal enough to require no effort, and late. Always late. Keith is the youngest. 31. Lives in Nashville, works at a mechanic shop on Dickerson Pike. He borrowed $6,000 from Mama in 2022 to fix a truck he later sold. He never paid it back. He didn't refuse. He just stopped mentioning it, the way a river doesn't refuse to flow uphill, it simply doesn't. Every few months Mama would say, "Keith called," and I'd wait for the rest. He says he's doing good. She never mentioned the money. Keith visited less than Garrett. He came once in the summer for a cookout, ate 2 plates, talked about a girl he was seeing, and left before the dishes were done. The last time Mama saw him was August, 7 months before she died. He stayed 90 minutes. Fixed a leaky faucet in her bathroom. She talked about that faucet for weeks. That's what scarcity does. It makes crumbs feel like meals. After he left that day, I went into Mama's closet to get a blanket and found a shoebox on the top shelf. Inside were report cards, school photos, and a birthday card Keith had made when he was 8. Construction paper, glitter, glue, misspelled words. Happy birthday, Mama. You're the best. Love, Keith. She had kept it for 23 years. I put it back and closed the closet and stood there for a minute. Then I went to the kitchen and washed the dishes from the cookout. Because that's what I did. I showed up. And I cleaned up. She died on a Tuesday morning at 6:14 a.m., March 4th. Her neighbor June Harper called me at 6:21. She had found Mama in bed still, the oxygen still running, the light on the nightstand still on. She looked peaceful, June said. I drove to the house in 9 minutes. I sat with her. I held her hand, which was cool but not cold, and I said the things you say when there is no one else to hear them. Then I stood up and made 3 phone calls. Garrett answered on the 4th ring. I said, "Mama passed this morning." He was quiet for 5 seconds. Then he said, did she have any life insurance or anything? I closed my eyes. I opened them. I said, "I'll send you the details." Denise didn't answer. She texted back at 8:43. Oh my God, are you serious? I'll try to make it. When is the funeral? No, how are you? No, I'm so sorry. Just logistics and a conditional verb. Try. Keith didn't answer. His voicemail was full. I texted him, "Mama died this morning. Call me." He read it at 9:07. I saw the read receipt. He didn't reply. I sat on my mother's porch in the metal rocker and listened to it squeak. 4 seconds. 4 seconds. 4 seconds. Then I called Harold Fun. Harold pulled out the manila envelope I'd seen Mama tuck into her purse 18 months earlier. He read the will to me slowly. The estate included the house on Birch Lane, valued at approximately $285,000, savings of $47,200, personal property around $8,600, against $11,800 in unpaid medical bills and whatever the funeral would cost. But here was the part that changed everything. The will contained a conditional bequest. If all 4 children attended the funeral and contributed to burial costs, the estate would be divided equally. If any child failed to meet those conditions, their share would be redistributed to those who did. Harold looked at me. She was very specific about the language, he said. I asked her 3 times if she was sure. She was sure, I said. He nodded. What do you want to do? I thought about Garrett's insurance question. Denise's conditional verb. Keith's full voicemail. I want to give them a chance, I said. A real one. I'll tell them the estate is mostly debt. If they show up anyway, they show up for her. And if they don't, Harold finished, the will does what your mother intended. That evening I sent a group text. Hey, everyone, I met with Harold about Mama's estate. It's mostly medical debt and funeral costs. There isn't much else. The funeral is Saturday at First Baptist. I could use help with the arrangements and splitting the costs. Let me know. I pressed send at 7:42 p.m. Garrett replied in 9 minutes, the fastest he had responded to anything related to our mother in over a year. That's rough. Ashley's due date is coming up and we're stretched thin. Not our problem if she left nothing. Not our problem if she left nothing. I read it twice. I set the phone down. I picked it up. I read it again. I screenshot it and saved it to a folder I had started that week. Denise replied at 8:14. OMG, that's so sad. I can't afford a flight for nothing though. I'll send flowers. Keith read the message at 8:37. I saw the check marks turn blue. He didn't reply. Not that night, not the next morning, not ever. 3 siblings, 3 responses. One wanted to know about creditors. One offered flowers she would never send. One said nothing at all. And not one of them, not a single one, said they would come to bury their mother. I locked my phone, poured a glass of water, drank it standing at the kitchen sink, then opened my laptop and started planning a funeral by myself. The casket was $3,200. Mid-range, solid wood, white satin lining. Nothing flashy, Mama would have said flashy was for people with something to prove. The burial plot was already paid for. She had bought it 12 years earlier, next to my father's empty one, because even after he left, she kept a space for him, which tells you everything about her capacity for loyalty. Vault, $1,400. Service fee at First Baptist, $300. Flowers, $420. Obituary, $280. Programs, $90. Transportation, $500. Headstone, another $2,000, but that could wait. Total, $8,200. I paid it. Wednesday, 3 days before the funeral, I tried Garrett one more time. Not because I expected anything, but because I wanted the record clean. He answered. I could hear a television in the background. I said, Saturday at 11. First Baptist. I really need you there. He sighed. Not a sad sigh. An inconvenienced one. Myra, Ashley's due date is right around the corner. Doctor said no travel. I said, her due date is April 18th. That's 6 weeks out. Silence. He hadn't expected me to know that. Well, she's been having complications. Braxton Hicks, swelling. I don't want to leave her. I said, okay, Garrett. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just let the excuse sit there where he put it, like a napkin over a stain. That evening I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed. An Instagram notification. Garrett had been tagged in a post at a brewery in Decatur. The photo showed him and 2 friends at a high-top table, beers raised, big smiles. The caption, Wednesday vibes. Ashley was in the next photo in the carousel, sitting beside him, visibly pregnant, laughing with a mocktail. No swelling. No complications. Just Wednesday vibes. I screenshotted it. I saved it to the folder. I rinsed my toothbrush and went to bed. My mother was right about a lot of things. One of them was this: people don't show you who they are when it's easy. They show you when it costs something. Thursday, no flowers from Denise. I checked the porch in the morning and again after work. Nothing. I drove to Mama's house to pick out her burial clothes and found June Harper already there, sitting on the porch with a casserole dish covered in foil. "Green bean," she said. "Your Mama's recipe." Seemed right. I took it and something in my throat tightened, but I swallowed it. I went inside. The house smelled the way it always did, lavender soap and coffee and something warm underneath that was just her. I went to the bedroom closet and chose the blue dress Mama wore to church on Sundays. Small white flowers on the collar. She had ironed it herself 2 weeks ago, and the creases were still sharp. On the way back I stopped at the florist on Main Street and bought lilies, white ones, Mama's favorite. I bought them because the ones Denise promised weren't coming, and a funeral without flowers from your children felt like a sentence with no period. Friday, Keith still hadn't responded. Not to the group text, not to my direct message, not to the voicemail I left when his inbox finally had room. Silence was Keith's native language. He spoke it fluently. That evening, while I was stacking plates in Mama's dining room for the repast, I passed her dresser on the way to the linen closet. Her reading glasses were still there. A glass of water, half full. And draped over the chair beside the bed was her gray house dress. I picked it up to fold it, and something crinkled in the pocket. I reached in and pulled out a card. Construction paper, faded. Glitter glue, mostly gone. Big crooked letters in a child's handwriting. "Happy birthday, Mama. You're the best. Love, Keith." The same card from the shoebox. She had moved it to her pocket. She had been carrying it. My brother hadn't called his mother in 7 months, hadn't paid back $6,000, hadn't responded to the news of her death, and she had been carrying his misspelled birthday card in her dress pocket like a talisman. I put it back. I folded the dress with the card inside. I finished setting up for the repast. I didn't cry. I had work to do. June came back that evening. She didn't knock. She never did. She just opened the screen door and said, "It's me," and walked in carrying a box of tissues and a Ziploc bag of homemade peanut brittle. We sat on the back porch. The rocker squeaked. For a while we just sat. Then June said, "Your Mama told me something last fall after Thanksgiving." I waited. She said, "June, when I go, you'll know who my real family is by who shows up. Myra will be there. The others, I pray they surprise me, but I've stopped expecting it." June reached over and squeezed my arm. "She was proud of you, baby. Not because you were perfect. Because you were present." I nodded. I ate a piece of peanut brittle. It was too sweet, the way June always made it, and it tasted like every Saturday afternoon I'd spend at Mama's kitchen table. She wasn't angry at them, June said. She was disappointed. And you know your Mama, disappointed was worse. I did know. Mama never yelled. She just got quiet. And her quiet had weight. It pressed down on you like a hand on your shoulder. You couldn't shrug it off. You just had to sit with it until you understood what you'd done. Neither of us said anything else about the will. Some things don't need to be spoken to be understood. Saturday, March 8th. The funeral. First Baptist had set up 40 chairs in the main sanctuary. I counted them when I arrived at 9:30. 40 chairs for a woman who had nursed half the county, who had worked the night shift at Shelbyville General for 22 years, who had held the hands of dying strangers because she believed no one should leave alone. By 11 people were seated. June Harper. Pastor Jim. Harold Funn. 2 women from Mama's quilting circle. A cousin from Murfreesboro. Gerald Whitson from the funeral home, who stayed because I think he felt bad. A former coworker from the hospital. A man I didn't recognize who turned out to be a patient's husband. Mama had cared for his wife during her last weeks, and he had driven from Toma just to pay his respects. 2 neighbors from Birch Lane. And me. No Garrett. No Denise. No Keith. 40 chairs. 29 of them empty. Pastor Jim stood at the pulpit, and before he began the service, he said, "Lorraine left a note. She asked me to read it at her funeral, whatever the turnout." He unfolded a piece of paper. His hands were steady. She wrote, "I asked God for good children. He gave me 4. One of them answered." He folded the paper. He didn't add commentary. He didn't need to. The sentence sat in that sanctuary like a bell that had just been struck. You could feel it in your chest. I looked at the 29 empty chairs. I looked at the casket. I looked at my hands in my lap. One of them answered. She meant me. I had known it, but hearing it in her words, in that room, with all those empty chairs, I felt the weight of being chosen by someone who had been abandoned by everyone else. I stood at the pulpit to give the eulogy and looked at the 11 people and the 29 empty chairs and said what was true. My mother was a nurse for 30 years. She worked nights because the pay was better and because she said the people who needed help most were the ones awake at 3 a.m. She raised 4 children mostly alone after our father left. She never complained about that. She complained about the cost of gas, and the neighbor's dog, and the fact that no one at church could make sweet tea correctly. But she never complained about being left. I paused. She asked for very little. She asked for time. She asked for presence. She asked us to show up, not with money, not with grand gestures, just with ourselves. She called. She waited. She kept a notebook by the phone and wrote down every call she made and whether anyone answered. I held up the notebook. Small, spiral-bound, blue cover. 17 calls to 1 child in 14 months. 2 answers. I set it down. She didn't ask for perfection. She asked for a Tuesday evening. A phone call. A ride to the doctor. She asked for the things that cost nothing but time. And time was the one thing some people decided she wasn't worth. I looked at the casket. She was worth it. She was worth every Tuesday, every phone call, every 40-minute drive to Murfreesboro. She was worth showing up for. I sat down. June was crying. Harold was looking at his shoes. The man from Toma was nodding. And somewhere in Atlanta, Nashville, and Dallas, my siblings were doing whatever they were doing. And it wasn't this. The letters from Harold landed on Friday. By Saturday morning, my phone was ringing again. Funny how that works. 13 months of silence, and all it took to break it was a piece of certified mail with the words, "Probate Court," on the envelope and a return receipt attached. Garrett called at 7:12 a.m. His voice had a frequency I hadn't heard before. Not sadness, not anger, something closer to the sound a man makes when he realizes a door he assumed would stay open has just been locked. I got a letter from Harold Fun. It says the estate is valued at over $300,000. You told me there was nothing. I told you there wasn't much, I said. I said there were significant debts. Harold can walk you through the details. Myra, what the hell is going on? Probate. It's a legal process. You'll want to read the letter. He hung up. Denise called at 9:45. She was crying, but it was the kind of crying that had edges. Sharp. Performative. Designed to make you feel responsible. You told us there was nothing. I told you the truth. There are debts. There is also an estate. The will has conditions. Harold's letter explains them. What conditions? Read the letter, Denise. She hung up too. Keith texted at 1:15 p.m., "Can we talk?" I wrote back one word. Thursday. 3 siblings, 3 responses. This time, not silence. Noise. Urgent, panicked, self-interested noise. Not one of them had called when Mama was dying. Not one of them had come to her funeral. But a letter with a dollar amount? That got their attention inside of 24 hours. My mother knew. She always knew. Monday, Garrett hired a lawyer. Travis Kellner, a small firm in Midtown Atlanta that handled estate disputes and personal injury, the kind of office with a billboard on the interstate. Travis called Harold to argue that I had misled the heirs about the estate's value. Harold called me afterward. I laughed. It was not a warm laugh. I told them there wasn't much, Harold. That's true. Compared to what Mama gave them over the years, $321,000 isn't much. It's the change she had left after raising them. Harold was quiet for a moment. I like that. That evening, Garrett posted on Instagram again. A restaurant. Ashley smiling. A plate of shrimp and grits. Caption, date night with my queen. I screenshot it. Not because I needed it for the lawyer, because I wanted to remember the math. Garrett couldn't afford to fly to Shelbyville for his mother's funeral. Couldn't split the cost of a casket. Couldn't take a Saturday away from his life to sit in a church for 90 minutes. But he could afford a lawyer in Midtown, date night shrimp and grits, and a brewery on a Wednesday. The money was never the problem. The priority was. Tuesday, Denise called again. This time, no crying. She used a different voice, soft, conspiratorial, the tone of a woman who closes real estate deals by making the buyer feel like they're on the same team. Myra, I think we need to talk. Just us. Sister to sister. I let her talk. She said she knew she should have been there more. The divorce, the market, everything with Ron, it had been a nightmare. I know Mama called you 17 times, I said. Silence. 17 times in 14 months. You answered twice. She kept a notebook, Denise. Dates, times, whether anyone picked up. She was a nurse. She charted everything. More silence. Then, okay, fine. I wasn't perfect. But a good sister would help the rest of us understand what's going on. A good sister would make sure this is fair. I set my coffee down. A good sister would have answered Mama's phone calls. The silence this time was different. Heavier. You know what? Her voice had lost the softness entirely. You've always had this thing, this superiority. Just because you stayed in Shelbyville. Just because you were the one who showed up. Yes, I said. That's not superiority, Denise. That's attendance. She hung up. Denise couldn't handle a mirror. She could sell a 3-bedroom colonial to a couple who didn't need one, but she couldn't sit with the fact that she hadn't answered her dying mother's phone calls. I didn't need a lawyer. I had arithmetic. Wednesday night, the night before the reading, I was heating up leftover soup when someone knocked on my apartment door. Not a text. Not a call. A knock. I opened it. Keith was standing there in a work jacket with grease under his fingernails and a look on his face I hadn't seen since he was 15 and had wrecked Mama's car. I should have been there, he said. I leaned against the door frame. Yes. I got the letter. I know about the money. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I didn't go to the funeral and I should have. And I didn't call when she was sick and I should have. And I owe her $6,000 I never paid back, and she never said a word about it. And somehow, the fact that she never said a word, that's worse. He was looking at his boots. She carried your birthday card, I said. He looked up. What? The one you made when you were 8. Construction paper, glitter glue. She had it in her dress pocket. His jaw tightened. He blinked several times. I'm sorry, Myra. I believed him. Keith was not Garrett. Keith did not calculate. Keith simply disappeared, which is a different kind of cruelty. The kind that comes from cowardice rather than selfishness. But it's still cruelty. The person on the other end of the silence doesn't care about the motive. They just hear the silence. The reading is tomorrow at 2, I said. Harold's office. I'll be there. He stood there a moment longer. I think he wanted me to invite him in. I didn't. Not because I was punishing him, because some doors close when you don't walk through them in time. He nodded and left. I closed the door. I finished my soup. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and let the week replay. Garrett's text. Not our problem if she left nothing. I said it out loud to the dark room. Not our problem, as if he'd been part of anything. As if he'd earned the right to that pronoun. He hadn't been part of Mama's decline, or her care, or her death, or her burial. But he wanted to be part of the estate. I thought about the brewery photo. The shrimp and grits. The lawyer in Midtown. I thought about Denise and her conditional verb, I'll try, and her flowers that existed only as a promise. I thought about Keith on my doorstep with grease on his hands and a sorry on his lips, and the particular tragedy of a man who knows he failed but didn't figure it out until someone died. I thought about what June had told me. Myra will be there. Not sometimes. Not recently. Always. That word carried 33 years of Tuesday nights and Thursday dinners and oxygen bills and drives to Murfreesboro and bath towels on the floor after a fall and dishes after every meal and phone calls answered on the first ring. Always. Thursday morning. Harold called at 8. Travis Kellner filed a formal objection. Undue influence. He's claiming you manipulated your mother during her illness, isolated her from other family members, and coerced her into changing the will in your favor. I almost laughed. Almost. Harold. I didn't even know what was in the will until after she died. I sat in the hallway reading a bass fishing magazine while she met with you. I know. I was there. I've already drafted my response. He cleared his throat. I informed Mr. Kellner that the will was executed 18 months before Lorraine's death, at a time when she was mentally competent, living independently, and making her own medical and legal decisions. I also informed him that his client, Garrett Thornton, did not visit his mother between November 25, 2024, and her death on March 4, 2026. That's 15 months. During which time he did not call, did not contribute to her care, and did not respond to medical updates except with, and I'm quoting my notes, a thumbs up emoji. I sipped my coffee. What did Kellner say? He asked for time to consult with his client. Harold paused. Myra, I've been doing this for 34 years. Your mother sat in my office and told me what she wanted and why. She wasn't confused. She wasn't manipulated. She was a 66-year-old retired nurse who could see clearly which of her children had shown up and which had not. And she made her decision accordingly. I know, I said. She was always good at charts. 2 p.m. Thursday. Harold's office above the hardware store on the square. Frosted glass door. Fenn and Associates in gold lettering, starting to peel. I went straight in. Garrett arrived first at 1:52, button-down shirt, arms crossed, staring at a spot on Harold's bookshelf. Denise arrived at 1:58. She looked like she'd been on a plane. Wrinkled blouse, limp hair, a rolling carry-on she left in the hallway. She had flown from Dallas. Not for the funeral. For the reading. Keith came in at 2:01, clean, collared shirt, no grease. He nodded at me. I nodded back. He sat in the chair closest to the door. He wanted an exit. We were all in the same room for the first time since Thanksgiving 14 months ago. The last time we'd all been together, our mother was alive. Now she was in the ground and we were in a lawyer's office. And the distance between those two facts was made entirely of choices. Harold closed the door. He opened the file. He did not rush. Thank you all for coming. Lorraine May Thornton executed this will on September 14, 2024, in this office, with 2 witnesses. She was of sound mind and acting of her own volition. There was no coercion, no undue influence, and no ambiguity in her instructions. He looked at Garrett when he said, undue influence. Garrett didn't flinch, but his jaw moved. Harold walked through the numbers. Gross estate, $340,800. Against that, $11,800 in medical bills, $8,200 in funeral costs paid in full by the executor, Myra Thornton, plus probate and legal fees. Net distributable estate, approximately $321,000. Denise made a small sound, like air escaping a tire. Garrett uncrossed his arms. Keith looked at his hands. $321,000. The price of a house built on night shifts, a savings account assembled from decades of careful living, and a life spent being present. Now, Harold said, the conditions. He read slowly. I, Lorraine May Thornton, direct that distribution of my estate shall be subject to the following condition: each of my 4 children shall receive an equal share of the net estate, provided that each child fulfills both of the following requirements: physical presence at my funeral service, and a good faith contribution to my burial and funeral costs, commensurate with their means. Any child who fails to meet both conditions shall forfeit their share, which shall be redistributed equally among those children who did fulfill them. This condition reflects my deeply held belief that love is measured not by words or intentions, but by presence and action. I do not impose this condition as punishment. I impose it as truth. Harold set the page down. The room was very still. Garrett spoke first. You knew. He was looking at me. You knew about this before the funeral. You knew there was money and you told us there was nothing. I told you there was mostly debt, I said. I asked you to come to the funeral, not for money, for her. That's not the point. That is exactly the point. She asked you to show up. That was the condition. Not a dollar amount. Not a legal filing. Presence. A Saturday. A 90-minute drive from Atlanta. You manipulated this. You wanted us to stay away so I could what, Garrett? Pay $8,200 out of my own pocket? Plan the funeral alone? Give the eulogy to 11 people in a room set for 40? He opened his mouth. He closed it. Harold said, for the record, Myra had no legal obligation to disclose the estate value prior to probate. Her actions as executor have been proper and well documented. The will's conditions were set 18 months before Lorraine's death. Myra did not draft them. She did not suggest them. She learned of them after her mother passed. Garrett's face was red. His hands were flat on the arms of the chair. I watched him do the math. $321,000 divided by 4 versus $321,000 and nothing. And I watched him understand that his mother had seen him clearly and had written it down. This won't hold up, he said, voice rising. Travis says conditional bequests can be thrown out. Harold didn't blink. Your attorney is welcome to file a contest. I'll note for your consideration that Tennessee courts have consistently upheld conditional bequests when the conditions are reasonable, clearly stated, and not contrary to public policy. Asking your children to attend your funeral is reasonable. Asking them to contribute to burial costs is reasonable. Your mother's will was drafted by a licensed attorney, witnessed by 2 parties, and executed by a woman of sound mind 18 months before her death. A contest will cost you time, money, and the last of your credibility. Garrett stood. You think this makes you the good one? He was looking at me now. You think sitting with her every night and paying her bills and playing the martyr makes you better than us? I looked up at him. I didn't stand. I think it makes me the person who was there. He stared at me. I let him stare. He turned to Harold. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Harold said, I look forward to it. Garrett left. He didn't slam the door, but he closed it hard enough that the glass rattled in the frame. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavy, fast, the sound of a man leaving a room he was never prepared to be in. Harold turned the page. There's more, he said. He pulled a second document from the file. Not typed. Handwritten. Blue ink, the careful cursive of a woman who had spent decades writing patient notes under fluorescent lights. Lorraine asked me to include this. She wrote it herself and sealed it with the will. She asked that it be read to any child who contested or questioned the conditions. He unfolded it. Denise said, "Don't." Harold looked at her. Then at me. I nodded. He read. To my children who are hearing this. I love you. I have loved you since before you had names. I loved you when you left. And I loved you when you didn't call. And I loved you when you chose your own lives over mine. Because that is what mothers do. But love does not require me to pretend. You were not there. You were not there when I was sick. You were not there when I was scared. You were not there when the oxygen ran out at 2 a.m. and Myra drove to the pharmacy in her pajamas. You were not there when I fell. You were not there when I died. The ones who couldn't even send flowers, I forgive you. But I will not fund what you refuse to honor. This is not revenge. This is the record. And the record is clear. Denise broke. Not the performance from the phone call. Real breaking. Her shoulders folded inward. She put her face in her hands and made a sound that came from somewhere deep, the place where guilt lives when it has nowhere else to go. The ones who couldn't even send flowers. Mama had known. Of course she had known. She was a nurse. She charted everything. She knew what she'd been promised and she knew what she'd received, and she had written it down, because that's what you do with evidence. You preserve it. Harold set the letter on the desk. The room was very quiet. Outside, a truck passed on the square. Keith spoke for the first time. What about the $6,000? Harold looked at the file. Lorraine addressed that separately. She directed that Keith's debt be forgiven and not counted against any share of the estate. She wrote in the margin that the debt was between a mother and her son, and she did not want it to outlive her. Keith closed his eyes. She forgave it. Not a question. Keith stood up. He was not angry like Garrett. He was not broken like Denise. He was something else entirely, a man standing in the exact spot where grief and shame overlap, where you realize the person you failed has given you one last gift, and you cannot give anything back. I should have been at the funeral, he said. Yes, I said. It was the same exchange we'd had on my doorstep. Same words, same quiet. But here in Harold's office, with the will open and Mama's handwriting still facing the ceiling, it meant something different. On my doorstep, it was an apology. Here, it was a verdict. Keith picked up his jacket. She was right to leave it to you. She left it to whoever showed up, I said. That's what I mean, he said. He walked out and closed the door gently. Denise stood, smoothed her blouse, and left without a word. Her carry-on bumped against the wall in the hallway. I heard the wheels on the wooden floor, then the stairs, then nothing. It was just me and Harold. The way it had been at the beginning. He gathered the papers and slid them back into the file. Took off his glasses. You okay? I thought about it. I'm not sure okay is the right word. But I'm steady. Your mother would be proud of that. She'd say steady was better than okay, anyway. He smiled. She would. I didn't drive home. I drove to Birch Lane. Parked in the driveway and sat in my car. My phone buzzed. Garrett. I didn't look at it. I already knew what it would say, something sharp, something financial, something that began with you and ended with a threat that would cost him money he could have spent on his mother. I thought about his text from that first night. Not our problem if she left nothing. The words people say when they think there is no consequence, those are the truest words they'll ever speak. I got out of the car. I walked to the porch. The dogwood was in full bloom now. White-pink petals catching the late afternoon light. The rocker was where it always was. I sat down. It squeaked. 4 seconds. I looked at the yard, the street, the mailbox Mama had painted green because she said every house deserves one cheerful thing. I had the key in my pocket. I had always had a key. But today it meant something different. Today it was not a spare. It was mine. I unlocked the door and walked into my mother's house, my house, and stood in the hallway and breathed in lavender and coffee and the ghost of someone who had loved me enough to put it in writing. The aftermath unfolded the way Harold said it would, slowly, expensively, and in Garrett's case, pointlessly. He filed the contest 2 weeks after the reading. Harold responded with a 30-page brief, the will's execution date, witness statements, Lorraine's medical records confirming her mental competency, and a full timeline of each child's contact with their mother during the last 14 months of her life. He attached the call log from Mama's phone records. He attached the screenshot of Garrett at the brewery 3 days before the funeral. He attached Denise's text promising flowers that never arrived. He attached Keith's red receipt with no reply. The judge reviewed the filing and denied the contest in 6 weeks. Garrett's legal fees came to $4,200. $4,200, to be told by a Tennessee probate court what his mother had already told him in her own handwriting. You were not there. Denise sent me an email 3 weeks after the reading. It was long. It said she was sorry. It said she had been going through a hard time. It said she hoped we could repair our relationship. It did not say she should have answered Mama's phone calls. It did not say she should have come to the funeral. An apology without an admission is just a press release. I read it. I did not respond. Keith texted me on what would have been Mama's 68th birthday. Just one word, daisies. Her favorite flower. I knew what it meant. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete it either. I moved into the house on Birch Lane in May. I kept the rocker. I kept Mama's notebook by the phone. I kept the birthday card folded inside the gray dress pocket. I kept the manila envelope from Harold's office in the top drawer of the dresser, next to her reading glasses and the half-empty glass of water I still hadn't poured out. The house was quiet. It was always quiet now. But it was mine. Not because I had wanted it. Not because I had planned for it. But because I had been the one who drove 12 minutes every evening and brought dinner on Tuesdays and answered the phone on the first ring. The estate settled in July. $321,000. All of it to the one who showed up. People ask me if I feel guilty. I don't. She left it to me because I was the one who showed up, not the one who showed up after certified mail, not the one who showed up when there was a dollar amount attached, but the one who showed up with pot roast on Tuesdays and a ride to Murfreesboro and a hand to hold at 2 a.m. when the oxygen ran thin. That's not favoritism. That's a receipt. A church with 40 chairs and 11 people. A check for $8,200 signed alone. A text that said, "Not our problem if she left nothing." My mother documented the wound. And then she let the record speak. If you've ever been the one who showed up when no one else did, the one who answered the phone, drove the miles, stayed until the end, this story is yours too. And so is the truth it carries. We'll see you in the next one.